how having a clear social mission helped this entrepreneur overcome the fear of failure to make something great happen in the world.
From Blue Tribe Media, this is the Good Business Podcast, the show where we talk to business leaders, social entrepreneurs and innovators about aligning profit with purpose and how you can make doing good, good for business. Now here's your host, James McGregor.
In today's episode, I'm talking with Seema Sanghavi, who's the founder of Cooks Who Feed, who transformed her love for cooking into a business that benefits artisans in India and connects with non-profits. Now, this episode's a really great example of the power one, as Seema is probably like many of you out there listening. See, Seema read an article on food waste one day and felt the need to do something but wasn't really sure where to start. Then one day, while she was out on a run, she came up with an idea. That idea was Cooks Who Feed, where she decided to create a side hustle whilst working full-time and raising 3 young kids. Cooks Who Feed sells aprons, and for each apron sold, they provide 100 hungry people with a nutritious meal while also empowering female artisans in India to help others. In this episode, I talk with Seema about the event that triggered her drive to make a difference, the fears she had to face to make it happen, and how the power of one person can create a ripple that spreads around the world. Let's check it out. So today's guest is Seema Sanghavi. So she's the founder of Cooks Who Feed, a social enterprise that produces handcrafted aprons to feed those in need to prevent food from going to waste. So welcome to the show, Seema.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background. So how did what led you to the creation of Cooks Who Feed, and where does this passion for social enterprise come from?
I think I've always had this passion, to be honest, since I was a kid. So since I was very young, around 6 years old, I learned to cook. I've always loved to cook and cook for others. And it's always bothered me that, in today's world, it's sort of a feast or famine situation, and always felt compelled to help others who didn't get to experience food the way that I did. I think I've always had that passion for food, and because of that, that's always made me want to help others who don't enjoy it, who don't get the chance to enjoy it.
Yeah. And what about the social impact angle? So, your Cooks Who Feed is looking at, addressing not just food waste, but also dealing with abject poverty and hunger. Where does the interest for that come from? Was there a particular moment in your life that generated that interest?
Yeah, actually there is. So a friend of mine actually started an NGO in India that hired marginalized women and taught them how to be seamstresses and, trying to give them employable skills. And a few years back, I was in India for a wedding and told her I wanted to come and see what she was doing and, what kind of work they were doing. And it was actually that was kind of the moment for me when I met these women and saw them working and wanted to help. And at that time, didn't know how I was going to help, but knew I had the opportunity to say, okay, maybe we can work together somehow so I can provide more opportunities for women in similar situations. And that's where the moment started for me. Like, I didn't want to come back to Canada and forget what I had seen. So it's always in the back of my mind, what can I do to help? Whether it's, what kind of product could I create, and I would use them as my production team exclusively, and help grow that base. That's kind of where it happened. So it was kind of organically, like I had that moment with the ladies, and then from there, with my passion for food and cooking, and it kind of led to the idea of Cooks Who Feed.
Oh, so tell us about how that idea even came about. I believe you're out on a run when inspiration struck.
Yeah. So it was, like I said, always in the back of my head, like how can I help these ladies? And, you see so many things in your life that there's a lot of situations where you see people less fortunate and you say, you think, oh, I should do something, but then you forget, right? Life happens and it moves on. And I really didn't want that to happen with this, I met the ladies. I looked at it very much was, I was meant to meet them. I just have to figure out how I'm going to help them. And that's when I was out for my run, kind of thought, well, what if we created an apron, because that has to do with food. So that's my passion. So, something that we can market to foodies. The ladies could make the apron, and then even to take it a step further, let's start a business where the women are actually giving back to others. They're so used to accepting charity and being the beneficiaries of charity. Let's turn it around and actually make them proud that they're actually helping less fortunate as well. So I said, let's work with charities who are on the ground, helping to collect food waste, save food waste to feed the hungry. So that's where the idea, for the one apron equals 100 meals came from.
Great. So I think that's a really important point about empowering, particularly when you start looking at social impact and not doing handouts, giving people agency over their own lives and the ability to shape their own lives. I think that's a really important consideration. So you're out on a run. You've come up with this idea for an apron. I mean, what happened next? How did you turn that into Cooks Who Feed?
Yeah. So actually, the first thing I did was get on the phone with my friend and said, what are some challenges that you're currently facing? And she, was letting me know, hey, one of the big things is that, they were currently working with various different designers, but she's like, this is not consistent work. They don't use our team exclusively. So it's hard to grow the team. And also they're looking for very specific patterns and fabrics. And sometimes it's difficult to find. In India, the thing is, sometimes you might see something in a shop and you go there the next day and it's gone and they don't know when it's coming back. You don't know. So she's like, it's always this problem as well. So I said to her, well, I have this idea for an apron to create aprons. We don't have to stick with any particular, fabric that has, a pattern. So that solves that problem. And in India, things like cotton and linen, canvas, they're all readily available fabrics. So those are great fabrics to use for making an apron. So that fit the bill. And then I said, you know what, let's use the team exclusively. I will start the business and you will be my production side of the business. So that will solve that problem of, I'm using that. No, I wouldn't be using you exclusively. So that whatever aprons orders we get, you would make them. So that's kind of how that happened. And the next step was, okay, let's find a designer. I wanted to try to hire as many women from marginalized communities as possible. So got in touch with a designer in India who was from one of these communities and allowed her to be creative and come up with our first few designs. And just from being there, met vendors who were doing, one of the aprons that we launched with is made from recycled plastic bottles. So met a vendor who was producing this fabric. So that kind of led me down to, hey, let's only use natural fibers or recycled fabrics. Let's not, use polyester and these other man-made materials that cause more harm. So let's try to create, let's try to fight hunger the most sustainable way possible. So it just kind of grew from there. And and then when we launched on Kickstarter, and we launched with 2 designs to start with.
Right. And so tell me about that Kickstarter campaign. How did that go?
It was tough. We did meet our goal successfully. It was a 30-day campaign, but we met our goal on the 28th day. But it was tough. So I was working full time. I had another job. I have 3 little kids. So it was something I was doing in the evenings and weekends, and it was nonstop. And I'm not naturally a salesperson, so I found it really difficult to always put myself out there and put the product out there and keep pushing. But I knocked on doors, went to businesses, went wherever I could to tell our story and drive traffic to the campaign. And it was what was interesting to see was that people I had never met in my life, except for that one time when I'm telling them our story, they would then go on their social or, post our story, and they were sharing. So it's almost like I was creating these little, the ambassadors really for the brand, by telling the story. So that was really, really interesting to see. And when we ended our Kickstarter, the interesting part was, obviously my friends and family helped contribute to that success, but I would say the majority of the backers are people I had never met, and actually from different parts of the world. So that was really interesting to see. And
so what was your goal on Kickstarter? What were you trying to achieve in that first campaign?
Yeah. So in the 30-day campaign, we wanted to reach 14,000 Canadian.
And how did you feel when you hit the goal?
Relieved. Very relieved. I think there's a fear, right? Like when you start something especially when you put so much time and energy into something, there's a fear of, it's not going to work, or what if it fails, then what? And there's, you don't want to have to go back to all your friends and family and say, well, I couldn't do it. That was a fear for me. I had never, prior to that, had my own business. So I was not aware of this fear. So it was very, to be honest, very emotional when we finally hit that goal. That, okay, now I don't need to go back and tell everyone that I couldn't do it. And also I couldn't think of a way that I could go back to India and explain to these ladies why we weren't moving forward. Because up to that point, I was bootstrapping it, so I really needed the funds to be able to invest in inventory.
Yeah, it's interesting how powerful that mission is. So that the why you were starting this business was to to help and empower these women, and having that clear in your head is a really powerful motivator. It's interesting you say how fear. A fear of failure, because I think that's something that a lot of people who think about starting social enterprise face. And my father was a soldier for most of his life, and he used to, as a kid, he used to always say to me, fear has a job to do. Its job is to tell courage when courage needs to turn up. And so I think that's when you feel afraid about doing something or fearful of an outcome, it's just actually there telling you that you need to do something about it. It's giving you a kick in the butt to get going. So. That's a great story. So you got your Kickstarter campaign through. You achieved your goal. What next?
Yeah, so we used that inventory to obviously fulfill the Kickstarter orders, but then it also allowed us to get some extra inventory, right? So we could actually start getting some traffic and some sales through our site. Another thing that we did was we started. So the company is based in Toronto, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but Toronto has a great food scene, and it's growing every year. So one of the things that I wanted to do was reach out to some celebrity chefs in the area and partner with them, to basically design their apron. Right? They would create this apron with us that represented their personality, and we would name it after them. And we were looking obviously for chefs that followed our values, that shared the same values, and we're also very passionate about hunger and food waste. And so that was the next step. Was okay. Now we have this inventory. Let's reach out to chefs to see who can we get. At least start with getting a couple of these chefs and build up our collection, because it's hard to run a business when an apron business when we only had 2 aprons. So we reached out to some chefs, and then we also had our designer in India design a few extra different looking aprons as well, using different fabrics. And actually just 2 weeks ago, just updated the site. We now have 7 aprons, and 2 of which are chef inspired. So named after 2 chefs, and they helped us design them. So trying to leverage, the following that these chefs have, right? Because I'm sure you're well aware, chefs these days are celebrities, right? It's a cool thing to do now, to cook, right? So instead of just trying to build up our own brand image organically, we thought, let's partner with chefs who already have such a great following, and that's our market too, right? People who love to cook. So that was one of the things we wanted to do, and the other thing too was to grow our B2B B2B side of the business. So initially, I thought we would just sell our aprons through our site, but then when we ran the Kickstarter, we were getting interest from businesses. So, like for example, I got a lot of realtors reach out to me because when they give someone a gift when they buy them a home, they thought this could be a really good housewarming gift for them, especially if they've shown interest in cooking. So now we've started partnering with some local culinary schools and working with some real estate agencies. So we're trying to build that network up as well. And we'll customize for them. So put their logo on it, use their colors. And a lot of businesses obviously want to be tied to something sustainable.
And where does the food waste piece come into Cookshoe Feed? Yeah,
so we currently have 3 charity partners that we work with. One in Canada, one in US, and one also in India. We want to grow this as we grow and have impact in other countries. But we started with these 3, and these 3 charities rescue food waste to feed the hungry. So it's not about creating more food. We don't need more food, right? I think everyone is well aware now of the food waste issue that we have in the world today. And I know in Canada, they say over a third of the food we produce gets thrown out. And this is food that never hits a table, right? This is food that's thrown out at the farmer level or at the grocery store level. And we spend, the irony of it all is we spend so much money to produce this food, right? Just for it to end up in a landfill. So, they say on average worldwide, it's about a quarter to a third of the food we produce is thrown out, but we still have over 800 million people who are hungry. So it's literally 2 problems that can fix themselves, right? There's so many issues in the world today, but most solutions require people to change their habits. and change their behaviors, which is a difficult thing to do, right? To require a large amount of people to change the way they do, they go about their daily life is a very difficult thing. So with these two problems, there's organizations that are on the ground that are, rescuing the food waste and distributing it to people who need it. But they're charities. So they rely heavily on volunteers. They rely heavily on donations. So I wanted to help them with their work, right? I wanted to help solve this. I believe they call it the hunger and food waste paradox, to kind of bridge the gap between the food waste and the hunger.
So, I know the business is still quite young, but what do you think is the biggest challenge you've faced so far?
Oh, I would have to say actually that the biggest challenge has really for me been time management. Like personally, manage, when you're, it's just me. I've had a couple interns as well help me, but because it's mostly just me, wearing multiple hats, learning as fast as I can, things I don't know, I never knew anything about. So learning quite fast and just trying to manage everything and still move forward, right? Trying to see progress, while at the same time still, like I mentioned earlier, I have 3 small children. So trying to manage those responsibilities as well. I find that for me is the hardest, keeping my sanity when I need to keep, children happy as well as keep the lights on for a business. That for me is probably my biggest challenge. When the Kickstarter was successful, I left my full-time job to focus on this. So up until that point, I was trying to kind of juggle all 3 things. And yeah, so my relationship obviously with my husband was non-existent at that point as well. So just trying to manage, my personal responsibilities with work, I find very challenging.
Yeah, we should give yourself a big pat on the back. So, being a mum's a full-time job almost. So, working, trying to look after 3 kids and start a social enterprise. That's a big challenge. So,
Thanks.
Well done.
And I think the other challenge I think is doing business in India. I don't know. I think when you have to do business in a different country, there's challenges, right? If you don't understand, and my background's actually Indian, but I didn't grow up in India. I grew up in Canada. So there's some cultural differences that make it a bit challenging. For myself working in India, just different way of doing business. I find that, one challenge I always face is, Indians are on their own time. It's a very slow pace of life. They're never in a hurry. So I find whenever I go there and I think, okay, I've got all these list of things to do. And when I go, I usually try to be there for 3 to 4 weeks. And I think, okay, I'm going to get everything done. It's a different story when you get there. Things just take a very long time. Just no one's in a hurry. So I'm the only one.
Yeah, I spent 7 years developing renewable technologies in India, so I understand where you're coming from, because I think a lot of people go to do business in India. The majority of people speak really good English, and they dress the same, and they, particularly in Australia and India, a lot of interest in cricket, so very similar interest in sport. The universities are amazing over there, so they're really well educated. But the business culture is completely different. So you sort of get lulled into this false sense of security that's exactly like doing business in Canada or in Australia. Whereas, the business over there operates more, I think, on emotion and trust. So it's do they like you, and then do they want to do business with you? Whereas I think most Western business approach is very transactional. If I do this, you'll do that. Whereas in India, that's not necessarily how business is done. So
I agree.
But still amazing country with massive potential.
I agree.
It's certainly worth going over there and experiencing the place. And the food's awesome. I love the Indian food. You've left your full-time job. You've now doing this full time. Was there like tell us about that moment when you went, okay, I can make a business out of this?
Well, to be honest, that's kind of why that was the intent when I started the Kickstarter. It was getting to a point where I knew I had to make a decision, and I thought, let me do a Kickstarter to kind of validate that it's not just a great idea in my head, that other people also think it's a good business idea and would actually purchase the product. And also, I didn't want to invest too much any more time and energy, and also financial resources into this without confirming that that it actually could be a real business. So that's why that was the idea when I started the Kickstarter. And to be honest, it kind of happened in a funny way. So on the 28th day of the 30-day campaign, we met our goal, and on the 29th day, I went into work, and I worked for a publishing company, a big publishing company here. And when I went in, my boss sat me down and she said, you know what, we're restructuring. We would like to package you out. So it was in a weird way. I thought, oh my, did I wish this on myself without, did I accidentally wish this upon myself? And it just happened. So it was really mixed emotion. Like, I was sad. I'd never been in a situation where I had been let go. So I was actually taken aback and a bit sad of the situation. But at the same time, there was a sense of relief. And because I was thinking, if that didn't happen that day, probably the next day I would have walked in and given my notice, and wouldn't have had a package. So I just thought, okay, in a weird way, they just invested in me without knowing it.
Well, it was meant to be.
Yeah, I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with that.
So what does Cooks Who Feed look like today? So you've done this all on your own up until recently. What does the business look like today? How many employees? What's the future look like?
So it's still I'm still the only full-time employee. I have hired a few interns to help me. I've recently got into an incubator through one of the local universities, and that's been a wonderful experience, just being around various advisors who've been helping me grow my business. And I also receive funding from the Canadian government to help grow my business. So I've been using that to obviously actually have inventory on hand, to attend different shows. There's a lot of food and lifestyle shows that happen in the area and also in the northern parts of the US. So I've been trying to attend different shows just to build more awareness and get out there and, tell our story. And also still working away at partnering with as many chefs that make sense, that share our values. So, so, I mean, we're still relatively small from an employee standpoint. But definitely growing. Like, we see a lot of potential in different ways that we can grow, whether it's from the, growing from a B2C standpoint or also from the business side, selling to businesses as well.
So the business only officially launched beginning of this year, is that right?
Yeah. So we officially launched in March on Kickstarter. That was March 8th was our official launch date.
Awesome. So still very young. So you've got an exciting journey ahead
still
of you.
Very young. Yeah. Still struggling a bit to keep the lights on, but still very young.
Well, it sounds like the trajectory is going in the right direction anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still very optimistic and I feel good about it, and we have been growing. So yeah.
So having got to this stage, if there was someone else out there listening now who had been out on a run and come up with a brilliant idea for a social enterprise, what advice would you give them? I
would tell them to do it. Like, if you're passionate about something, do it. Because I feel, at least if I look at my own experience, like I said, I've always been passionate about it. I've always wanted to do something where I was helping others. I think if that is, I've always believed that people are here for a reason. You have your own path. So if you feel like that's what you're meant to do, then do it, because otherwise it's always going to be in the back of your head. And I don't think you'll ever be happy with anything else. And what's the worst that can happen? At least that's what I keep telling myself, is what is the worst that can happen is you would have to go look for a job like everyone else.
And don't let those fears limit your potential. No,
and I mean, there's I think that whole security when you work for other people, that you feel like you have some sort of security, that's false. I did get restructured. I got, so it's a false security. I think it's just because it's the norm. You feel a bit safer with what you know.
So what would you like people to do after they listen to this podcast?
Go to our site and check us out. Learn more about what we're doing and see the impact we're having. So it's cookswhofeed.com. And there we've got some videos on an introduction video on what we're doing and our purpose and how we're growing. Yeah, just check us out. And if you love to cook, get an apron.
And if people want to get in touch with you or through Cooks Who Feed, are there other social channels that they should reach out?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram and Facebook, and we're also on Pinterest. Our handle is Cooks Who Feed. And they could also feel free to just reach me at Seema at cookswhofeed.com.
Awesome. All right, so let's wrap up with the Mad Minute. So 5 questions in 60 seconds. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
It would be to surprise and delight your customers. And the person that gave that to me was a gentleman by the name of Gibson Bindle. He's a former VP of product at Netflix. So I had a session with him, and one of the things he said was that he believed Netflix made it to where it is today because they always strive to surprise and delight their customers.
What's your favorite business book?
Contagious by Jonah Berger. It's all about what makes things popular, what makes things sticky, why people talk about certain products and ideas over others. It's a great book.
Your favorite business tool or resource to help you deliver impact through your business?
For me, it's all about events where I can actually talk to people and, express my passion for what I'm doing and even show them products and they can see the quality. I'm all for networking, any type of networking event.
And what's your favorite quote?
The 2 most important days of your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why, by Mark Twain.
I love it. And if you go back in time and give your 20-year-old self some advice, what would it be?
Don't be average. Don't follow the beaten path. Do what you feel you're supposed to be doing.
Awesome. All right. So Seema Sanghavi, thanks for your time. Love what you guys are doing. If people, we'll provide links to all the, your website in the show notes. So if people didn't get a chance to write it down, we'll provide some links to that. But love what you're doing. Love the mission. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, James.
What a great example of the impact that one person can have. So many of you listening out there have great ideas, but actually make those ideas happen, you need to act on them. And one of the biggest barriers and challenges I see people facing is that they feel uncomfortable with the idea of selling their idea or getting people to buy into their idea, just like Seema was. But there is a way to sell your idea without being salesy. And to show you, we've put together a free ebook on selling sustainability, which is available through the show notes, which you can access at www.bluetribe.co/podcast. And check out episode number 7. If you want to exercise your Power 1 right now, you can start by sharing this episode with a friend to create your own ripple that might help another change maker like you make something great happen in the world. Coming up in the next episode.
We were really excited because we thought that, yes, you would get it and you would absolutely love our idea. And that was our first impression. When we actually told you our idea, things changed a little bit from there.
In the next episode, how 3 young engineers with a dream to change the world were given a harsh wake-up call on what it really takes to take your idea and make it into something real. If you have ever struggled to get people to buy into your idea to save the world, then you really need to listen to this episode. Well, that's it for another episode of the Good Business Podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm James McGregor. Until next time.